and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, this is the part 2 of my series video. These are all the series that I started since joining BookTube. Now, a couple of them are because of challenges that I probably would have kept doing, would have done even without BookTube, like SEASL and the Goodreads nominees awards challenge that I've done for myself. However, all of them, I believe all of them, are highly talked about on BookTube or have at least been mentioned, or at the very least, I would not have subscribed to the book boxes that these books came in, because that's where a lot of these come from. And I have these split into two categories. One, the first and smaller category is series that are either complete or there's at least one more book in the series that I haven't read yet. So there's still a possibility of me reading more. The other is books that are either just the first in the series. I'm going to show you just the first in the series for all of them. So it's either that only the first in the series is published, or I have not yet read the second in the series and there's a potential for more. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. In these individual parts, I have also split it by age group. In the first and smaller part, the series that are either completed or have at least one more that I can read before I can get caught up, I don't have any middle grade. All of those middle grade series I started prior to starting BookTube. Now, we start with Beast of Prey, which I read recently towards the end of 2022. I believe this is just a duology. It may actually be a trilogy. I haven't heard about a third book. I believe I own the second book or have an arc of it. This is African-inspired mythology. Because I have so many of these series, I'm not going to spend a long time talking about each one. I'll probably say one or two things about each. Next we have Darius the Great Is Not Okay. This was an unexpected 5-star read that almost made it to my top 10 of the year. This was standalone for a couple years, and then another one was released, I think last year, which is, I think Darius the Great Deserves Better. This is a modern contemporary story about a main character named Darius who is figuring himself out. Next, we have a series that is most definitely completed, and that is the Shadow and Bone trilogy. The funny thing about this is I have literally read both books in the other two duologies in the series that come after this trilogy, and I haven't read books 2 and 3. This is the Grishaverse, really well known on BookTube. Next, we have The Darker Shades of A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I've heard that the subsequent series, the sequel series, is coming out in October, so this should be one that I prioritize. I own books 2 and 3 in the series, so I really need to get to those. Lastly, of the young adult category for this, we have The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I read the first book for the SEASL list. It was on this year's list. I probably still would have started this series even without BookTube because I've been doing SASL for years. However, this has definitely been talked about a lot. And the final book in the trilogy came out this year and for some reason won the Goodreads Young Adult Award. Maybe I'll enjoy it, but I've heard that it was disappointing. So it probably just won because of popularity. Now we come to the adult books in series that are either fully published or have at least one more to read. I believe that this next one is just a duology, as far as I know. There may be another book that comes out later, but I'm pretty sure it's a duology, and I own the other book, and that is A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. I don't know the name of the series, but the second book is A Fire Endless, and I did buy the special edition of this. This is Scottish-based mythology going back to an island that is split, and there's a whole lot of animosity between the two sides. Then we have one that I wasn't sure whether or not I would keep going with, but I have heard that the series improves after the first book, and I was intrigued enough to continue, and that is the Winter Night trilogy, starting with The Bear and the Nightingale. I read this last year as part of Polathon, which is going on right now. I'm filming this in beginning of February 5th, I believe, and I'm not competing in, I'm not participating in Polathon this year. It just didn't work out with the books that I own. However, I was intrigued enough by this to say, I'll go ahead and read the rest of the series. Next, we have a series where I own the next two. It is not fully published physically, and I don't know if it's fully published as a webtoon either, and that is the Lore Olympus series. However, I own all three, and I've read the first two, so I still have the third one to read, and this is a Hades and Persephone retelling, which I really enjoy. Took me by surprise. And lastly, we have the behemoth when it comes to adult fantasy series, and that's The Wheel of Time. I have read The Wheel of Time and The Great Hunt. I own The Dragon Reborn, and I just got a couple more later in the series, I think books 7 and 10. I need to collect the rest of the series. I do vastly prefer this version of it. There's so many descriptions on what Wheel of Time is. I don't need to give one here. All right, now, these series, a handful of them have 2 books in the series, but I have them in here because I've read both of the books and I'm waiting on the next one to be released. So I do have some middle grade for this, and we'll start off with one that I changed my mind about after my first read, and that is Amari and the Great Game. I read it and thought it was average the first time I read it. I don't know what was going on in my brain because I reread it and went, this is amazing. So I also own, did I say Amari and the Night Game? Great Game, obviously. Amari and the Great Game is the second book. This is Amari and the Night Brothers. This is the one that I changed my mind about. Great Game I read and loved from the beginning. So I do own Amari and the Great Game. I don't know how many are supposed to be in this series, but this is just fantastic. Next we have Nevermore by Jessica Townsend. I definitely read this because of BookTube. I picked it up to fulfill a prompt in a readathon. I think it was a host fave in whatever readathon it was for. This is really annoying because it's a printed on sticker that says for a limited time only. That's not very limited. That's permanent. Anyway, this is an adorable world that I love. I now own books 2 and 3 in the series. Still need to read them, but also book 4 has yet to be published. Next we have a book that I read for the Goodreads Choice Award, and that is Zachary Ying and the Dragon Emperor. This is by Jiren J. Zhao. I did not particularly vibe with the first book I read of hers, which is Iron Widow, but this one I absolutely loved. It is based on Japanese mythology, and I loved how it subverted the idea of you can't necessarily trust the first supernatural being that comes across your path. Next we have a series that some people say is middle grade, but it's a spin-off of an adult series, and it's also written by Shauna McGuire under one of her pen names, and that is Over the Woodward Wall. I own book 2, and book 3 has been published. I don't know how many there are going to be in the series, but if it's anything like the Wayward Children series, she probably would just keep writing them. Next we have Skender and the Unicorn Thief. I loved this so much, and I'm really surprised that it didn't make the Goodreads Choice Awards list. I do have a Barnes & Noble exclusive edition. This takes unicorns to a place where you would not expect. And then lastly we have another book that I read for the Goodreads Choice Award, and that is Witchlings by Claribel Ortega. I loved this so much, so wholesome. The stakes are absurd, but you find that a lot with middle grade books. I already have the second book on pre-order. I believe it comes out this year in 2023. So those were all the middle grade. Now I'm gonna do the adult next because it's a smaller stack. I mean, is anyone surprised? I tend to read a lot of young adult books. Now, the adult stack, we start with, I believe, 2 of them are BookBox books, and the other it's one that I saw because Murphy Napier talked about it, again, BookTube influence, and that is The Bone Shard Daughter. I think this is the Drowning Empire series. I own and have read book 1 and book 2, The Bone Shard Emperor. The book 3 is coming out this year, early on in the year, I believe. The Bone Shard War. That's the conclusion to the trilogy. I've had it pre-ordered for quite some time, and I cannot wait to finish this trilogy. Next we have The Stardust Thief. It is Arabian-based mythology. This, again, was a BookBox book, and I have a special place in my heart for Arabian-based mythology. As you can see, I really enjoy this. Next, we have one that I read for the Goodreads Choice Award, but I also got because of a book box, the Goldsboro Science Fiction Fellowship, I believe they call it. This one was intriguing enough. It wasn't super high rated for me, but it's intriguing enough that I'm going to give it at least the next book because these are so huge. And that is Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro. It's a bit of Victorian Gothic X-Men vibes. And again, gorgeous sprayed edges. And so now we get into the young adult books. And I'm going to start with a book that I didn't know was going to be a series because the second book hasn't been released, and I don't think anyone knew it was going to be a series, so this is a new addition to the series list, and that is Cemetery Boys. I believe Aiden Thomas's next book is going to be book 2 in Cemetery Boys, and I just realized that I'm also going to read the sequel to Sunbearer Trials, so I'll hold this up for both Cemetery Boys and the Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas. Next, we have one where I wasn't necessarily intrigued by the first book as much as I had hoped. However, I think part of it was mindset, and also I want to not necessarily reread this particular book, but continue on in the trilogy because people on BookTube have talked so highly about that. So I'm going to continue reading that, and that is the Fireborn, the Aurelian Cycle by Rosario Munda. This is, I just realized I should have put in fully published because the third book in this series came out. I just had this in the wrong pile, so this should have gone in fully published, but I just need to catch up with it. Next, we have one where book 2 came out at the end of last year, and I read book 2 because I wanted to, but also because it was part of the Goodreads Choice Award, and that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. It is a follow-up to Arthurian legend and an imagining and exploration of it. I love this series so much. I want so much from this. I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be a trilogy, maybe 4 books. So I'll take that for sure. And if she wanted to do 5 books, I would take that as well. Next, we have The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. This is definitely darker than a lot of the other series that I read and that I typically read. I found it really interesting where she took it in The Merciless Ones, which was not necessarily where I expected, but I really loved how she explored who the main character was trusting and how that trust was taken advantage of. This is also based on African mythology. Next, we have Foul Lady Fortune, and reading this book and enjoying this book as much as I did really has changed my mind on Chloe Gong and has made me want to give her other duology a shot, which if I had started it, I would have included on the fully published series. But since I haven't started it yet, it's a series that I'm going to start. This, however, is, I believe, set up to be a duology, and there are some a short story collection that has been released. I don't know whether I'm going to purchase it or not, or just check that out from the library, but I love this edition. The combination of the colors is just gorgeous. This is historical fiction with a twist. Now, the last 4 are all books that I got as, or at least I heard of them because they were in a book box, and I got, in one case, one of them the sequel in a book box, or special edition at least. And that is Ballad and Dagger by Daniel Jose Older. Reading this has made me want to go check out Older's backlist, and this is the first YA novel from the Rick Riordan Presents imprint. And this was in an Owl Crate box. I really enjoyed the way that Older takes Caribbean Latinx mythology and runs with it. Next, we have Once Upon a Broken Heart. I did definitely get this version of it because I prefer the the UK edition. This was in either Fairy Loot or Lumicrate. I don't remember which one. And I don't have that version because that was before I started subscribing, before I got off the wait list. I do have the special edition of The Ballad of Never After. And this is an interesting take on fairy tales, where it takes all of the fairy tale tropes and you just run with it. And there's so many in there, and I just absolutely adore how Stephanie Garber has taken this world, and so much so that I have Caraval on my 23 and 23 list. Second to last, We have Blood Scion by Deborah Fillet. This rivals the Merciless Ones or the Gilded Ones for the, not gore, but darkness of it. This is also African-based mythology where she is hunted and not supposed to exist for her magic, and her people are oppressed. It's really fascinating, and this is where I first discovered how much I like the printed on covers. I don't know when the second book is going to be released. Again, with all of these, like with Once Upon a Broken Heart, I have read and owned the first two, but the third has not yet been published. All of these have books in the series that have yet to be published. And then lastly, we have a book I was so thrilled to get a hard copy of because I actually read it as an ARC, and I wouldn't have known about NetGalley without BookTube, but then it came in a book box, and that is The Darkening by Sunya Mara. I am in the minority when it comes to really liking this book, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. This world is battling against a storm that's not the storm like weather type that you would think of, and there's all sorts of backstory that goes into the building of this storm and the reason that it exists and the complicated interactions between all of the characters. This is just phenomenal. So there you have it. There are all of the series that I have started since BookTube, starting watching BookTube and then having my own BookTube channel. Again, like the other series video, I'm going to stack them up here instead of trying to hold them up.